From the age of exploration all the way through to our modern society, humans have placed a lot of value and romanticism in travel. When I started playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, I was disappointed by the fact that there was no set system to run travel over land. The system just wanted me to kind of handwave it. And that seemed to me to leave behind a rich opportunity for storytelling, especially from a game that takes so much inspiration from the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. I was wrong, actually, though. There is a system for running travel in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, but it is just scattered across so many different books and resources that it may as well not exist for how often dungeon masters use it. People instead homebrew the system, but that can have a lot of problems as well, because either if you're using the official rules or your own homebrew rules, they often end up feeling clunky. The rules don't affect the story, or because the rules aren't about the characters, or depending on the procedure used to run those rules, it may end up taking a long time to resolve. I'm Pat, and this is my cat. I make videos that give practical advice on how to simplify your game and gamify the simple within your game. This is going to be one of those videos that's definitely more about gamifying the simple. If that sounds good to you, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. On to the video. So, just like everyone else on the internet, I made my own travel system. There are plenty out there, but this is the one that works best for me. My system had 3 design goals. It had to matter to the story, it had to involve the characters, and it had to be relatively quick to resolve. When I was designing this system, I was definitely inspired by a lot of other systems that other people have published, and most of the stuff that I included in my system is directly taken from there. Particularly, Level Up Advanced 5th Edition's Trials and Treasures book. Cubicle 7's Uncharted Journeys also plays a role, as does the regular rules contained within 5th Edition D&D. Link down to all of those in the description. Before we begin, I think it's important to define what we mean by travel. And by travel here, what I mean is when characters have to cross large areas of the world, usually going from one location to the other. Notice that I say large areas. Like, this doesn't necessarily apply to something like going through a city on a shopping trip or crawling through a dungeon. It's merely meant to just go overland travel, and that's it. The first step to running my system can actually be done before play. In fact, before prep. It can be run during the campaign planning phase. I want you to first chop up your campaign setting into separate and distinct regions. Now, a region doesn't necessarily have to be bound by a biome, a landmark, or government borders like in the real world. Instead, I want you to chop your region up into places where a specific story is occurring. That story might be, is the big bad evil guy searching for the MacGuffin in this area? Or is a scouting force connected to the big bad evil guy assessing this area for some kind of weakness in its defenses? This will help our campaign stay more about the story. As an example of what a region could look like, here are some regions that I developed for my own Curse of Strahd campaign. Cover your eyes if you are playing Curse of Strahd or you are planning to play Curse of Strahd and you haven't seen the whole campaign settings map yet. Here is the Hills of Bleak Vistas. Here is the Wolf Run, the Barovian Basin, the Svalich Woods is kind of all this stuff. The Druidic Groves over here to the west, the Blocky Valley in the center, and Mount Baratok and Mount Gacchus, respectively. Okay, now that you have chopped your campaign setting up into regions, we are going to make some encounters specific to those regions. Why make encounters? Encounters are important because they are 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons way of gamifying players' experience of the world. Think of adversaries related to the story of the region. Make a D6 list of them. Generally, I like to follow this skeleton. A phenomenon encounter. A phenomenon encounter could be something like weather, or a trap, or a shrine that might be exuding some kind of energy, something like that. An encounter with an unnamed NPC, or you could think of these as monster encounters if that's the kind of campaign that you're running. A named NPC encounter, a sign of one of the above, where a sign would be something that kind of foreshadows an encounter, but wouldn't be the encounter itself. And then lastly, perhaps the most fun of all, roll twice on the above. Here is an example, again from my own Curse of Strahd campaign, of a set of encounters that were occurring in the Wolfrun region. We had a shrine to Mother Night that kind of exuded, again, like some kind of dark energy that got the players lost and turned around. A forgotten hunting trap that they could stumble into. Some werewolves running around. Then the two wolf hunters that they could find in Vallaki, Zoldar Zoldarovich and Yevgeny Krushkin. A sign of one of the above, which would mean I would roll again on that table, and then roll twice. When you roll twice, the reason I really love this one is because you can develop an interesting narrative for how the two encounters might be interacting with each other. So for example, if you get some werewolves and Zoldar and Evgeny, then they might be hunting those werewolves and they might be locked in a combat. Or alternatively, Yevgeny and Zoldar might have the werewolves trapped in a net. Or perhaps the shoe is on the other foot, and the werewolves have Yevgeny and Zoldar knocked out and are in the process of turning them into lycanthropes themselves. Okay, before we put it all together, I need to go through just a few more rules that I think really make this system sing. Okay, 2 rules. 1, you cannot long rest unless you're in a safe and comfortable place. That means you can't just camp up on the road and get all of your resources back. You have to rest somewhere where you feel safe and comfortable. Hint, an inn. This rule is here so that encounters matter. You can't just go supernova, burning all of your highest level spell slots and resources on the group of bandits that ambushed you on the road, because you might need those spell slots and resources when you go to face the big bad evil guy, which is what you're on the way to do. Players have to actually think about what they're going to do, what resources they're going to bring and level to this encounter, because they know that when they get to the place they're going, they actually may need them. The second thing that I do is food and water matters. I abstract this to something called supply, which supply is basically just 1 day's worth of food and water. This is something that I stole just whole cloth right from Level Up Advanced 5th Edition. The rule is that players can carry an amount of supply equal to their strength score. Personally, because I'm running a smaller campaign setting like Curse of Strahd, I abstract it to just the strength modifier. They must consume 1 supply per day, and if they do not, they get a level of exhaustion, or if you don't like using exhaustion in your game, they lose a hit dice. This will come into play later, but basically what this does is it makes time matter. How long they're on the road matter, because they're going to run out of food and water. And I think that this creates interesting choices for characters later on when we're talking about this procedure in route planning. Okay, that's all of the background work, but next you just have to run this procedure. And it's super quick and super easy. At least it's quick and easy enough for me. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to ask the players to draw their route on the map. If you're playing at a table, you can use a piece of yarn that you can have them draw the route using that piece of yarn. If you're playing on a tabletop like Roll20, you can just have the players draw on the map itself. But since they're going from point A to point B, the route that they take is very important and creates some interesting choices.
We could pass through the mines of Moria. My cousin Balin would give us a royal welcome.
No, Gimli. I would not take the road through Moria unless I had no other choice.
I think that it's really important to highlight and emphasize here that you can skip this step if there is really no important choice for the players in this instance. It may be immediately obvious to take the shortest route or just to take the safest route. And if that's the case, you can say, hey, I am assuming you guys are just taking the safest route. And they say, yeah. And then you can just move on and skip this step. Another optional step for this before starting the journey is to ask the players to determine their travel speed. And it's important that you don't get too bogged down in the details here, because your players aren't going to notice if travel times aren't consistent from adventure to adventure. Here's the chart that I use, but you can easily throw it out and get your own chart in there for speeds. All that's really important is that you have a chart for speeds to offer meaningful choices to your players. The meaningful choice here is slow, normal, or fast. Slow is assumed that the party is going stealthy. Normal is, well, it's normal. And fast means that they have a chance for an extra counter, but of course, it takes less time. And again, I want to stress, skip this step if it does not matter or if it does not offer a meaningful choice to your players. Step 3, ask the players for one thing that the camera sees them doing along the way. I'll often ask this because I like to think of my sessions like episodes. I'll often ask exactly that. What is one thing that the camera sees you doing along the way? Does somebody need to navigate? Potentially not if they're on a road, but if they're trekking through the wilderness, then that could be something that they would want to do to avoid getting lost. Should somebody be on lookout? Or is there any kind of special project that they would like to complete? Do they want to read that old tome that they found? Or do they want to entertain their fellow PCs? Step 4 is to just roll up some encounters on the encounter table that we generated in the background section. Roll 1 encounter per region, or 2 if they're being risky. If the encounter rolls up something sentient, make sure to include a reaction roll for that sentient being. Reaction rolls are popular in OSR games, and I find that adding them to my 5e games makes encounters feel less one-dimensional and less like everything that they're going to find wants to kill them. Throw it all together. Look at the route that they drew and determine which regions they're going through and which locations they'll be visiting along the way. Each day that passes, they must consume 1 supply. Narrate their successes of their activities along with the journey, interspersing the encounters that you rolled and some scenic descriptions. Once that's complete, just repeat step 3 to 4 for each region along the journey. I've run this procedure many times through, and I find that it meets my design goals. It's relevant to the story because we're using encounters that are specifically derived from the plot of the regional area. It involves the characters because we give them lots of choices throughout the procedure, and we ask them what their characters are doing. They're the main focus when we narrate this procedure through. And it's short enough for my purposes because I give myself the room to eliminate certain steps of the procedure when I don't find that they're useful to the objectives of the game. Make sure to keep each scene as more of a vignette than into a fully developed moment. You kind of get an idea of what each player wants to do first, then you ask for a little role play and a little bit of narration, and then lastly, you give them some kind of narrated resolution for their activity along the journey. That's how I run travel in my games. It's been pretty successful for me and for the types of games that I like to run. If you are looking for a travel system that is story-driven, involves the player characters, and doesn't take too much time to resolve the procedure, give this a shot and let me know what you think.